$2 trillion. That is the staggering financial black hole swallowed by the Pentagon's Joint Strike Fighter program. The ambition was arrogant, but mechanically impossible. Build one single invisible machine to dominate the United States Air Force, the Navy, and the Marine Corps simultaneously. The reality is a terrifying mechanical Frankenstein. By forcing a single airframe to somehow house the vertical lift fan required by the Marines, the reinforced landing gear and tailhook demanded by the Navy, and the massive internal weapons bay needed by the Air Force, aerospace engineers mutated the F-35 Lightning II into an overweight, aerodynamically compromised brick of titanium and composite plastics. We are looking at a machine crushed under the weight of its own contradictory military requirements. Let us examine the precise aerodynamic profile of the fuselage. To physically cram the 50-inch diameter, shaft-driven lift fan system directly behind the pilot's cockpit, the aircraft's upper body had to be forcibly widened and stretched. This engineering compromise created an unnaturally bloated cross-section, entirely destroying the sleek, predatory aerodynamic lines required for supersonic efficiency. In the strict mathematical realm of fluid dynamics, this bloated geometry caused the parasitic drag coefficient to skyrocket to catastrophic levels. Pushing this excessively fat fuselage through the dense atmosphere at transonic speeds is the physical equivalent of trying to drive a fully loaded industrial concrete mixer through a Category 5 hurricane. It bleeds massive amounts of kinetic energy during high-G maneuvers. When forced into a tight turning radius, the wings rapidly lose lift, the nose heavily drops, and the aircraft becomes a sluggish, highly vulnerable target, mathematically incapable of outmaneuvering older, much cheaper legacy fighters like the F-16 in a close-quarters dogfight. To forcefully compensate for this immense weight penalty and critical aerodynamic drag, Pratt & Whitney engineers were forced to design the F-135 afterburning turbofan engine. This is a marvel of brute force engineering, currently the most powerful fighter engine ever constructed in human military history, generating an earth-shattering 43,000 pounds of raw thrust. The internal titanium turbine blades spin at a terrifying 15,000 revolutions per minute, violently sucking in hundreds of pounds of cold air every single second. But this colossal unchecked power triggers a catastrophic, self-destructive thermodynamic crisis. At maximum afterburner, the variable geometry exhaust nozzle expels supersonic combustion gases exceeding 3,200 degrees Fahrenheit. This concentrated thermal output is the exact physical equivalent of strapping a commercial steel smelting blast furnace directly to the tailpipe of an aircraft. The destruction it causes is immediate and visible. When the F-35B variant rotates this vectoring nozzle 90 degrees downward to perform a vertical landing on the deck of an amphibious assault ship, the sheer kinetic force and extreme thermal radiation instantly vaporize the specialized non-skid friction coating. In prolonged hovers, the jet exhaust physically warps and melts the reinforced steel flight deck beneath it, forcing the United States Navy to spend tens of millions of dollars retrofitting their entire surface fleet just to survive the heat of their own aircraft. But the extreme heat does not just destroy the surrounding external environment. It aggressively cannibalizes the machine itself. When the F-35 attempts to maintain sustained interception speeds of Mach 1.6, the brutal combination of intense aerodynamic friction against the atmosphere and the localized radiant heat bleeding from the massive engine core completely overwhelms the operational thermal limits of the radar-absorbent material. This highly classified, top-secret stealth coating, applied Molecule by robotic arms at immense financial cost, literally boils off the airframe. The specialized bismuth imide resins and radar-absorbing polymers undergo rapid thermal degradation. The exterior skin of the tail section violently bubbles, blisters, and physically peels away from the horizontal stabilizers in midair, leaving jagged, highly reflective titanium scars exposed to the elements. The exact moment that delicate stealth geometry is physically compromised by the heat, the aircraft's radar cross-section expands exponentially. The $2 trillion ghost plane immediately lights up on enemy anti-aircraft radar screens, broadcasting its precise altitude, speed, and heading like a massive glowing distress beacon in the night sky. The invisible skin is literally melting off at supersonic speeds, instantly stripping away its absolute primary tactical advantage. But that severe thermal structural failure is just a superficial surface wound. To understand the true depth of this aerospace engineering disaster, we must strip away the exterior titanium plating entirely. We must dive deep into the internal skeletal framework, bypass the high-pressure fuel lines, and witness the 25mm rotary cannon that is violently tearing this $2 trillion machine apart from the inside out. Hidden deep within the internal weapons bay of the F-35A variant, specifically engineered to remain perfectly flush with the aerodynamic surface to preserve the radar-evading geometry, lies the GAU-22/A. This is a devastating 4-barrel, 25mm Gatling-style rotary cannon. In pure ballistic terms, it is a hyper-lethal kinetic weapon designed to shred armored targets at close range. But the physical integration of this weapon into the delicate stealth airframe is a catastrophic mechanical failure. When the pilot pulls the trigger, the electric drive motor violently spins the 4 heavy steel barrels, feeding high explosive incendiary rounds into the firing chamber at a staggering cyclic rate of 3,300 rounds per minute. The instantaneous mechanical detonation of hundreds of 25mm shells every single second generates an uncontrollable wave of kinetic harmonic resonance. In precise physical terms, firing this weapon is the exact equivalent of bolting an industrial, heavy-duty pneumatic concrete breaker directly onto the ultralight carbon fiber chassis of a Formula One race car and pulling the trigger. The immense, unmitigated kinetic recoil violently ripples through the aircraft's internal skeletal structure, placing extreme shearing stress on the main load-bearing titanium bulkheads. Because the weapon housing entirely lacks adequate physical shock absorbers to safely dissipate this massive ballistic energy, the resulting vibrations cause severe structural shearing. The intense mechanical shaking physically rips the expensive stealth coating right off the fuselage doors, permanently warps the delicate titanium mounting brackets holding the gun assembly in place. It violently misaligns the optical targeting sensors. The vibration is so extreme that the weapon mathematically cannot shoot straight. Official Pentagon operational test reports have bluntly classified the cannon's accuracy as entirely unacceptable, stating that the weapon blindly scatters its explosive payload miles away from the intended target area. The United States military essentially engineered a $2 trillion stealth fighter equipped with a hidden internal cannon that physically self-destructs the aircraft's own stealth capabilities, heavily fractures its own mounting hardware, and completely fails to hit the enemy in combat. But physical hardware fractures are only half of the structural integrity crisis. The true paralyzing nightmare exists within the invisible, intangible architecture of its electronic brain. We must analyze the Autonomic Logistics Information System, universally known across the fleet as ALICE. This is not just a passive diagnostic computer. It is the absolute digital overlord of the entire F-35 program, containing over 8 million lines of highly complex software code. ALS was ambitiously designed to autonomously monitor every single mechanical vibration, every drop of hydraulic fluid, and every microchip degradation in real time, instantly transmitting this massive cloud data to centralized Lockheed Martin servers in Texas to predict mechanical failures before they physically occur. But the reality of this software is a catastrophic operational bottleneck. The code is heavily plagued by critical algorithmic logic errors. ALS constantly generates thousands of false positive failure warnings, mathematically diagnosing perfectly healthy mechanical actuators and structurally sound engine turbines as critically damaged and unflyable. Because the flight computer is hardwired to trust the software over physical reality, a single glitching sensor transmitting a false line of code can instantly lock down the entire aircraft on the tarmac. A fully armed, perfectly functional stealth fighter, fueled and ready for an urgent combat scramble, will physically refuse to start its engine, simply because a localized server connection to a civilian database thousands of miles away timed out. Mechanics on the flight line are forced to spend hundreds of grueling hours meticulously bypassing software lockouts, manually overriding the digital system just to convince the machine it is safe to fly. They are reduced to ignoring the advanced digital readouts and physically inspecting components with flashlights and wrenches, entirely defeating the purpose of a multi-billion-dollar autonomic diagnostic network. The hardware is physically shattering under its own kinetic force, and the software is artificially paralyzing the fleet. But the absolute worst nightmare of this aerospace disaster is not found inside the roaring engine, core, nor within the self-destructing gun bay, nor even inside the millions of glitching lines of maintenance code. The true terror sits directly on top of the head of the human being, desperately trying to control this spiraling, out-of-control mechanical beast. We must perform a precise optical and biological analysis of the primary interface connecting the fragile human body to this $2 trillion machine. There is no traditional glass heads-up display bolted to the cockpit dashboard of the F-35. Instead, all critical flight telemetry, targeting radar locks, and thermal imaging are projected directly into the retinas of the pilot through the Generation 3 helmet-mounted display system. This is a custom-fitted carbon fiber augmented reality interface that costs taxpayers a staggering $400,000 per unit. 6 highly sensitive distributed aperture system infrared cameras are embedded perfectly, flush into the external titanium skin of the aircraft, continuously stitching together a real-time 360-degree spherical video feed. When the pilot physically looks down at their own boots, the helmet algorithms erase the titanium floor and project the thermal landscape passing thousands of feet below them directly onto their visor. But this unprecedented level of optical data integration introduces a fatal technological blind spot. Processing massive, continuous streams of high-resolution thermal video through multiple complex software layers creates inherent optical latency. A microsecond delay in image rendering at speeds exceeding Mach 1.6 creates a severe sensory mismatch between the pilot's inner ear vestibular system and their visual cortex. This technological lag induces violent spatial disorientation, motion sickness, and terrifying vertigo during high-speed, high-G combat maneuvers. The physical sensation is the exact equivalent of strapping a heavy, lagging virtual reality headset onto a driver navigating a DEFUNCT or Formula One race car through a winding track at top speed in the pouring rain. The helmet actively fights the biological processing power of the human brain. Furthermore, The sheer physical mass of this carbon fiber helmet presents a lethal kinetic danger. The unit weighs nearly 5 pounds. During a high-stress evasive maneuver, pulling 9 Gs of gravitational force, that helmet physically exerts 45 pounds of crushing kinetic pressure directly downward onto the fragile cervical vertebrae of the pilot's neck. Official aerodynamic sled tests revealed that if a pilot weighing under 136 pounds is forced to initiate an explosive emergency ejection sequence, the violent aerodynamic wind blast combined with the immense torque of the heavy helmet will snap the human neck like a dry twig. The military had to literally ground lighter pilots because the safety equipment would physically kill them before the enemy ever could. But the optical terror, violently, escalates when the sun goes down. During night operations, the advanced OLED microdisplays inside the visor suffer from severe backlight leakage, projecting a blinding ambient green glow directly into the pilot's eyes. During the most terrifying and statistically dangerous maneuver in all of military aviation, a nighttime arrested landing on the pitch-black, violently swaying steel deck of a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, the $400,000 helmet literally blinds the pilot. The excessive green illumination entirely washes out the external carrier deck lighting, completely destroying the pilot's organic night vision, exactly when millimeter precision is the absolute margin between a safe landing and a catastrophic, fiery crash into the ocean. The United States Navy was forced to restrict inexperienced pilots from flying the aircraft at night simply because the helmet makes the human blind. Yet, temporary visual blindness and severe neck trauma are fundamentally irrelevant if the human brain ceases to function entirely. Deep inside the environmental control systems of the airframe sits the onboard oxygen generation system, or OBOGS. This mechanical system is designed to extract, filter, and pressurize breathable oxygen directly from the ultra-hot engine bleed air, continuously feeding it into the pilot's sealed breathing mask. However, under the extreme aerodynamic stress of rapid altitude changes and sustained high G turns, the physical valves and pressurization regulators of this life support system experience catastrophic pressure drops. The OBOGS suddenly chokes, violently cutting off the critical flow of oxygen to the lungs of the pilot without triggering an immediate mechanical warning alarm. Even worse, microscopic traces of toxic engine exhaust and vaporized synthetic lubricating oils have occasionally bypassed the failing filtration matrix, pumping a toxic fog directly into the enclosed breathing loop. The pilot, locked inside a pressurized glass bubble screaming through the stratosphere at 1,200 miles per hour, is silently suffocated. They rapidly develop acute hypoxic hypoxia. Their cognitive functions collapse, their peripheral vision tunnels into total darkness, and their fine motor skills degrade to the point where they cannot physically reach the emergency backup oxygen toggle. This violent deprivation of oxygen at extreme altitudes is the physiological equivalent of instantly teleporting a sprinting marathon runner to the freezing summit of Mount Everest and clamping a heavy plastic bag over their head. The machine actively suffocates its master. Pilots have reported waking up from sudden blackouts while in terrifying vertical dives, mere seconds away from slamming into the earth, simply because the $2 trillion environmental system forgot how to physically pump clean air. We have systematically dismantled the anatomy of this defense program. We have witnessed the bloated, aerodynamic frame bleeding kinetic energy, the thermal exhaustion of the engine melting its own invisible skin, the internal rotary cannon violently tearing the titanium bulkheads apart with kinetic harmonic resonance. the autonomic software paralyzing the fleet on the runway, and the optical helmet blinding and suffocating the very pilots it was explicitly built to protect. The operational cost per flight hour is currently hovering around $36,000. It is literally burning through taxpayer money at a rate of $600 every single minute it stays airborne. This is the absolute peak of the sunk cost fallacy. The Pentagon has poured so much national wealth into this singular engineering gamble that they mathematically cannot afford to cancel it. The Joint Strike Fighter was explicitly designed to do everything for everyone. By stubbornly refusing to specialize, it became a terrifyingly expensive master of absolutely nothing. It is a flying testament to bureaucratic arrogance, a machine where the sheer complexity of the engineering actively defeats the raw brutality of warfare. This is the $2 trillion ghost that fights itself harder than it fights the enemy. Do not forget to subscribe to DEFUNCT and drop your engineering analysis in the comments below. If you think the F-35 is an unmitigated mechanical disaster, wait until you see the nuclear-powered flying fortress that poisoned its own crew and irradiated the atmosphere. We will tear that radioactive nightmare apart in the next video.